I never told my son about the two-witness rule until it was too late for him to work around it. He stood at the foot of my hospital bed in October 2022, holding a black folder with papers already flagged, and said, "Mom, we need to make this simple. As if my life could be reduced to a checkbox and a signature before lunch. He didn't know that I'd spent 30 years as a municipal bookkeeper, that I understood how forms protect power, or that his late-night search history, Withdrawing Life Support Iowa, Inheritance Before Death, was already screenshot and sitting in my sister's phone. The conflict didn't announce itself with shouting or accusations. It arrived in the space between his efficiency and my silence. It arrived when he started calling the nurses before he called me. And when I heard him ask about end-of-life protocols in the hallway, his voice low and practical, I knew exactly what I was dealing with. So I let him think I was too sick to notice. I let him organize my mail, flag my documents, and position himself as the person who would make the final call. Because the best defense is a policy he can't rewrite. And the hospital had a very clear rule about withdrawal: 2 witnesses, documented consent, and an ethics review if anyone disagreed. By the time he realized I'd restructured everything, my power of attorney, my trust, my beneficiaries, it was too late. The finish line he'd been racing toward had moved. And I was the one holding the map. Let me tell you how it happened. Let me tell you who was in that room, what was written on those forms, and how a single policy line became the difference between his plan and my voice. The first paper arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late October 2022. Marion Holt was 59 years old, a widow, and a former municipal bookkeeper who had spent 3 decades balancing city budgets in offices that smelled like old carpet and strong coffee. She had worked for the City of Des Moines Finance Department from 1990 until her retirement in 2020, processing invoices, tracking expenditures, and reconciling accounts with the kind of meticulous attention that made auditors smile and politicians nervous. She knew how numbers told stories. She knew how a single line item could reveal intention. And she knew that documentation was the difference between protection and vulnerability. She lived alone in a modest 2-bedroom bungalow on the north side of Des Moines, a house she and her late husband, Gerald, had purchased in 1999 for $68,000. The mortgage had been paid off in 2015. The property taxes were current. The utilities were auto-deducted from her checking account on the 15th of every month. Everything in Marion's life was organized, labeled, and filed. She kept her receipts in labeled envelopes, sorted by year and category. She kept her tax returns in a fireproof box in the hall closet. She kept her medical records in a 3-ring binder with tabbed sections: primary care, specialists, lab results, prescriptions. Gerald had died 6 years earlier, in March of 2016, from a massive stroke that came without warning. He'd been 62, a maintenance supervisor for the school district, healthy except for high cholesterol and a tendency to skip his annual physical. Marion had found him in the garage on a Saturday morning, slumped over his workbench, a screwdriver still in his hand. The paramedics had worked on him for 23 minutes. It hadn't been enough. Since then, Marion had lived quietly. She attended First Lutheran Church when her knees allowed it, volunteered at the library's literacy program on Tuesday afternoons, and sent her son, Daniel, birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside. Even though he was 41 years old and earned more than $90,000 a year as a regional sales manager for a logistics company, Daniel was her only child. He'd been born in 1981, 3 years after she and Gerald married. He'd been a good student, a decent athlete, and a responsible young man who'd graduated from Iowa State with a degree in business management. He'd married Kendra, a pharmacy technician, in 2008. They lived in West Des Moines in a split-level house with a 2-car garage and a fenced backyard. They had no children. Kendra worked night shifts at Mercy Medical Center. Daniel traveled frequently for work, managing accounts across 6 states. Marion saw them on holidays and birthdays. Daniel called every Sunday at 10 in the morning, a habit he'd maintained for years. The calls were pleasant and brief, updates on work, Mentions of upcoming trips, questions about her health. Marian never complained during those calls. She never asked for help. She'd raised Daniel to be independent, and she'd remained independent herself. That was the unspoken agreement. Pneumonia came in late September. Marian had ignored the cough for 2 weeks, thinking it was seasonal allergies, nothing urgent. She'd taken over-the-counter cold medicine, drank tea with honey, and kept her usual schedule. But by the last week of September, the cough had deepened. Her chest felt tight. Her breathing grew labored. One morning, she woke at 4 a.m., unable to catch her breath. She drove herself to the emergency room at St. Luke's Medical Center just after sunrise. The triage nurse took one look at her pale, sweating, breathing 30 times a minute, and placed her in a wheelchair. Within 15 minutes, Marian was in an exam bay with an oxygen mask over her face and N4 in her left arm. The chest X-ray showed bilateral infiltrates. Her oxygen saturation was 82%. The attending physician, a young man with kind eyes and tired shoulders, admitted her directly to the intensive care unit. Severe community-acquired pneumonia, he said. We're starting antibiotics now. You'll need oxygen support. Probably a few days here, then step down if you improve. Marian nodded. Speaking was difficult. She focused on breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth, slow and steady, the way the respiratory therapist had shown her. The ICU room was small and bright. A window faced the parking garage. A whiteboard on the wall listed the names of the day shift nurse and the attending physician, written in blue dry erase marker. The bed was narrow and firm, with rails on both sides. Monitors beeped in steady rhythm: heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation. And 4 poles stood beside the bed, bags of saline and antibiotics hanging from hooks. The room smelled like antiseptic and plastic. Marian spent the first 3 days drifting in and out of fever. She was aware of voices, nurses adjusting her physicians listening to her lungs, technicians drawing blood, but she couldn't track full sentences. Time became fragmented. Day and night blurred together. She remembered the sound of alarms, the coolness of 4 fluids entering her arm, someone adjusting the nasal cannula and whispering, "Breathe slow, breathe deep." By the 4th day, the fever broke. Her temperature dropped from 103.6 degrees to 99.2. Her oxygen saturation climbed to 91%. She could sit up without assistance. She could drink water without choking. The attending physician, a woman named Dr. Halvorsen, stood at the foot of the bed and said, "You're improving. Keep it up." That afternoon, Marian's sister, Ruth, arrived. Ruth Abbott was 62 years old, 3 years older than Marian, and a retired ICU charge nurse with 38 years of experience at Iowa Methodist Medical Center. She had steel gray hair cut short and practical, a no-nonsense demeanor, and shoes that never made noise on hospital floors. She carried a small potted plant, a spider plant with green and white striped leaves, and a spiral notebook with a green cover. Ruth set the plant on the windowsill, pulled a chair close to the bed, and said, "I'm staying." She didn't ask. She just opened the notebook, wrote the date at the top of the first page, October 6, 2022, and began logging every detail: nurse names, medication times, physician rounds, vital signs, shift changes. She wrote in green ink, her handwriting small and precise. Marian watched her sister write and felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief, not yet, but the beginning of it. Ruth understood hospitals. Ruth understood how systems worked. And Ruth understood that documentation was power. Daniel arrived that afternoon, carrying a smoothie in a clear plastic cup and his phone in his other hand. He was tall, 6 feet 1 inch, with thinning brown hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the efficient posture of someone who spent most of his day in meetings. He wore khaki pants, a blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and black loafers polished to a shine. He looked like a man who managed things: schedules, budgets, teams, problems. He hugged his mother carefully, avoiding the foreline, and said, "You're looking better." Marian tried to smile. "A little better." Daniel turned to Ruth. "What's the update?" Ruth recited the morning's vitals: Temperature 99.1, heart rate 86, blood pressure 120/78, oxygen saturation 91% on 3 liters. She listed the antibiotics, ceftriaxone and azithromycin. She mentioned the attending physician's name, Dr. Halvorsen. She described the plan: continue antibiotics for at least 5 days, monitor oxygen levels, consider step-down transfer if improvement continued. Daniel nodded, typing notes into his phone. His thumbs moved quickly across the screen. Good, he said. Let's keep it moving. He didn't sit. He stood at the foot of the bed, scanning the room as if inventorying it. Monitors for pole, tray table, oxygen tubing, the plant on the windowsill. Then he stepped into the hallway to find the charge nurse. Ruth watched him go. She made a note in her notebook. Daniel arrived 2:47 p.m., reviewed status, spoke to the charge nurse, did not ask the patient how she felt. Marion saw the note. She didn't comment. But she understood what Ruth was doing, creating a record. That evening, Daniel returned with a tablet and a list of questions. He sat in the chair Ruth had vacated and asked about discharge planning, home health options, follow-up appointments. He spoke quickly, his voice warm but transactional, the way someone speaks when they're working through a checklist. Marion answered when she could. But mostly, she listened. And what she heard was urgency. Daniel wasn't asking about her comfort or her fear or how she was coping with being sick. He was asking about logistics. He was managing. After he left, Ruth returned to the chair. She opened her notebook and wrote, "Patient noted increased anxiety after family visit." Daniel focused on discharge timeline, not current status. No physical contact beyond initial hug. Duration of visit, 22 minutes. Marion closed her eyes. The monitors beeped. The oxygen hissed through the cannula. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang twice and stopped. She thought about the way Daniel had stood at the foot of the bed, his posture formal, his attention divided. She thought about the way he'd asked, "What's the plan?" instead of, "How do you feel?" And she thought about Gerald, who used to say, "If something doesn't feel right, write it down. Paper has a long memory." The next morning, a woman from Patient Relations appeared. She was in her 40s, wearing a hospital lanyard and a polite smile. She carried a clipboard and a manila folder. She set the clipboard on the tray table and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Holt. I'm here to update your records. Do you have a current medical power of attorney on file?" Marion's breath was still tight, so Ruth answered. She did. Her husband passed 6 years ago. We never updated it. The woman nodded, made a note on the clipboard, and pulled a thick packet from the manila folder. She set it on the tray. "This is the standard form. Take your time reviewing it. You can name anyone you trust to make medical decisions if you're unable to. Once it's completed, we'll file it with your chart." "What if she doesn't complete it?" Ruth asked. The woman's smile remained polite. "Then the hospital follows Iowa's default surrogate decision-making statute. Next of kin, usually. But it's much clearer if there's documentation." She tapped the packet. "This keeps everyone aligned." She left. Ruth picked up the packet. It was 12 pages long, printed on hospital letterhead, with sections labeled, designation of healthcare agent, healthcare instructions, anatomical gifts, primary physician. There were signature lines, witness lines, notary sections. Ruth photographed the cover page with her phone. Then she opened her notebook and wrote, "Medical power of attorney packet delivered by Patient Relations, 12 pages, no witnesses present, no notary present, no explanation of 2-witness requirement for withdrawal, October 7th, 2022, 9:14 a.m. She left a small checkbox next to the entry. Unchecked. Marion watched her sister's hand move across the page. Each letter was deliberate. Each word was evidence. She thought about the 3-ring binder at home, the one where she'd kept every document related to Gerald's estate after he died. She thought about the cousin who had tried to contest the will, claiming Gerald had promised her the house. Marion had fought that case for 14 months, and she'd won because she had every receipt, every bank statement, every notarized signature stored in labeled folders. She'd learned then that paper wasn't just proof. It was armor. Daniel returned at noon. He carried a black folder, the kind with an elastic closure and interior pockets. He set it on the chair, pulled the medical power of attorney packet toward him, and flipped through the pages as if reading a user manual. "This is straightforward," he said. "You name someone to make medical decisions if you can't. I'll be the point person." He looked at Ruth. "Unless you want to split it." Ruth's expression didn't change. "We should read it first." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, but he smiled. "Of course." "No rush." He set the packet back on the tray. Then he pulled out his phone, glanced at the screen, and stepped into the hallway to take a call. Ruth picked up the packet again. She turned to the section titled Designation of Healthcare Agent and read aloud, "I appoint the following person as my agent to make healthcare decisions for me if I am unable to make them myself." She looked at Marion. "You need to think about who that should be. Not just Daniel," Marion said. Her voice was thin, but the words were clear. Ruth nodded. She made another note. Patient expressed preference for multiple decision-makers, not sole designation to son, October 7th, 12:18 p.m. That night, the nurse who adjusted Marion's oxygen was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes and a voice that carried a faint southern accent. Her name, written on the whiteboard, was Ashley, RN. She worked slowly, checking the flow rate on the oxygen regulator, repositioning the cannula so the prongs sat comfortably in Marion's nostrils, adjusting the tubing so it didn't pull. When she finished, she leaned close and said, "You're doing good." "Oxygen's holding steady." She paused, then added quietly, "If you ever need to make a big decision about treatment, about stopping something, hospital policy is clear. Documented consent. Sometimes 2 witnesses. Ethics consult if there's disagreement." She said it gently, as if sharing weather information, and then moved to check the 4-pump. Marion's heart rate, displayed on the monitor above the bed, stayed steady at 84 beats per minute. But something inside her shifted. 2 witnesses. She filed the phrase away, the way she used to file invoices that might become disputes later. Ruth had heard it, too. She made a note. Night RN mentioned 2 witness requirement for certain decisions, policy not detailed in packet, October 7th, 11:52 p.m. The next day, a pulmonary technician came to perform a breathing treatment. He was a man in his 50s with a gray mustache and a calm, steady manner. He set up a nebulizer, filled it with albuterol, and instructed Marion to breathe deeply through the mouthpiece. While she inhaled the mist, Daniel arrived. He stood at the foot of the bed, watching the treatment, his folder under his arm. When the technician finished and left, Daniel pulled the chair close. "I want to talk about next steps," he said. Marion set the mouthpiece down. "Okay, you're getting better. That's good. But we need to think about what happens if things get worse. If you need a ventilator. If they need to make decisions quickly." He opened the folder and pulled out a different form, a do not resuscitate order. "This is a DNR. It means they won't do CPR if your heart stops. A lot of people your age prefer it. Less suffering." Marion looked at the form. It was a single page, yellow, with boxes to check and a signature line at the bottom. "You'll want this, right?" Daniel said. The sentence ended with the word "right," as if her agreement lived inside it. Marion didn't answer immediately. She looked at Ruth, who was sitting in the recliner with her notebook open. Ruth said, "Has a physician discussed this with her?" "Not yet," Daniel said. "But they will. I'm just getting things ready." "Let's wait for the physician," Ruth said. Daniel's expression tightened. "I'm trying to help." "I know," Ruth said. "We'll wait." Daniel closed the folder. He stood, kissed his mother on the forehead, and left without another word. Ruth made a note. DNR form presented by family member without physician consult. Patient did not sign. Family member visibly frustrated. October 8th, 3:34 p.m. That evening, Ruth stayed late. The hospital allowed overnight visitors in ICU private rooms, and she'd brought a small duffel bag with toiletries, a change of clothes, and a travel pillow. She sat in the recliner with her notebook, cross-referencing medication administration times against the timestamps on the 4-pump display. At one point, she looked up and said, "He's been calling the nurses before he calls you." Marion nodded. "I know." And he stopped texting Kendra. Kendra was Daniel's wife. She was 44 years old, quiet, thoughtful, and the kind of person who sent thank you cards 3 days after every visit. She and Marion had always gotten along. Kendra worked night shifts at Mercy Medical Center, arriving at 6:45 p.m. and leaving at 7:15 a.m. Her schedule made family visits difficult, but she usually sent texts, "Thinking of you. Love you. Let me know if you need anything." But lately, Kendra's texts had been sparse. The last one, sent 4 days ago, had said simply, "Hope you're resting." Polite. Distant. Wrong. Ruth set her notebook down. Something's off. Marion agreed. But she didn't say it aloud. She just breathed slow and steady and let the machines track her heartbeat. By October 10th, Marion had been transferred from the ICU to the step-down unit on the 4th floor. The room was larger, with a recliner, a television mounted on the wall, and a window that faced the parking lot. The oxygen requirement had decreased from 3 liters to 2. Her temperature had been normal for 48 hours. Dr. Halvorsen noted in the chart, "Patient increasingly decisional. Oriented X3. Follow commands appropriately." That phrase, decisional, became a marker. It meant Marion could make her own choices. It meant no one else could override her. It meant that if someone tried to claim she wasn't capable of deciding, the medical record would say otherwise. Daniel arrived at 8:30 a.m., earlier than usual. He didn't bring a smoothie. He brought a legal pad and a pen. He sat in the chair, opened the pad, and started writing a list: discharge timeline, home health setup, oxygen equipment rental, pharmacy refills, follow-up appointments with primary care and pulmonology. He worked quickly, his handwriting sharp and efficient, the way someone writes when they're organizing a project. When he finished, he set the pad on the tray. "We'll need to coordinate a few things," he said. "I can handle most of it." Marion looked at the list. It was thorough, practical, and it assumed decisions she hadn't made yet. "I'll review it," she said. Daniel nodded, but he didn't pick up the pad. He left it there, as if it were already hers to follow. Later that afternoon, Marion asked Ruth to bring her purse. It was a simple request, but Ruth moved carefully, as if retrieving something fragile. The purse was black canvas, worn at the handles, with a zipper that stuck halfway. Inside, wallet with driver's license and insurance cards, keys to the house and car, a tube of lip balm, a pack of tissues, reading glasses in a hard case, and a small stack of mail held together with a rubber band. Marion pulled the mail out. She recognized most of it: a utility bill from Mid-American Energy, a credit card statement from Wells Fargo, a flyer from Hy-Vee advertising weekly specials, a reminder card from her dentist. But there were 3 envelopes that had been opened. Their contents had been removed and slipped into a clear plastic sleeve. The sleeve was labeled in Daniel's handwriting, "Urgent." Marion's hands trembled slightly as she pulled the documents out. The first was a notice from Protective Life Insurance Company, her life insurance carrier. It reminded policyholders to review and update beneficiaries after major life events such as marriage, divorce, birth of children, or death of a spouse. A form was included titled Change of Beneficiary Designation. Someone, Daniel, had circled the section in blue ballpoint pen. The second document was a letter from Green State Credit Union, where Marion had maintained a savings account for 22 years. The letter offered a payable-on-death designation, which would allow account funds to transfer immediately to a named person without going through probate. The relevant paragraph was highlighted in yellow. The third was a glossy pamphlet from Hamilton's funeral home. It advertised pre-need packages with pricing for caskets, urns, burial plots, and memorial services. Someone had circled the phrase "flexible payment plans available" and written a phone number in the margin. Daniel's cell. Marion set the sleeve on the tray. She didn't say anything. She just looked at it. Ruth leaned over, read the documents, and then picked up her notebook. She wrote, "Mail retrieved from patient's purse. 3 documents removed from envelopes and placed in clear sleeve labeled urgent, beneficiary update form circled, pot account form highlighted, funeral pre-planning pamphlet circled with phone number." All sorted by Daniel without patient's request or knowledge. October 10, 2022, for 17 p.m. She turned to Marion. Where did these come from? My mailbox, Marion said quietly. He's been sorting it. Ruth's expression didn't change, but her pen moved faster across the page. That evening, after Daniel left, he'd stayed only 12 minutes, citing a conference call he needed to join. Ruth stepped into the hallway. She walked to the end near the vending machines, away from the nurse's station, and dialed Kendra's number. The call lasted 6 minutes. Ruth listened more than she spoke. She asked 3 questions. Have you noticed anything different about Daniel? Has he mentioned his mother's condition to you? Have you seen anything unusual on your tablet? When she returned, she sat in the recliner and said, Kendra found something. Marion waited. Ruth continued, her voice low and factual. She was looking for a recipe on their shared tablet. iPad. They both use it. She saw the search history. Ruth paused, as if weighing whether to say the rest. Then she did. Term searched, Inheritance Before Death Iowa, Withdrawing Life Support Policy Iowa Hospitals, 1 witness versus 2 witnesses medical decision. The room went quiet. Not silent. Hospitals are never silent, but quiet in the way that matters. The kind of quiet where a fact settles and cannot be unsettled. Marion's pulse, visible on the monitor, ticked upward for 3 beats, 88, 90, 92, then steadied back to 86. She looked at her sister. Screenshot? Ruth nodded. Kendra took one. Timestamped. She sent it to me. She's worried. Save it, Marion said. Ruth opened her phone, found the message from Kendra, and forwarded it to her own email address and to a cloud storage account. Then she wrote in her notebook, search history documented and provided by daughter-in-law. Terms include inheritance before death, withdrawing life support policy, 1 witness versus 2, screenshot saved to 2 locations, evidence of intent. October 10, 2022, 8:47 p.m. Marion closed her eyes. The monitors beeped. The oxygen hissed through the cannula. Somewhere down the hall, a meal cart rattled past. A phone rang twice and stopped. She thought about the folder Daniel carried. The forms he'd flagged. The mail he'd sorted. The searches he'd made in the privacy of his home, believing no one would see. She thought about the 2-witness rule the night nurse had mentioned. And she thought about Gerald, who used to say, if something doesn't feel right, write it down. Paper has a long memory. She opened her eyes and looked at Ruth. We're going to need a lawyer. Ruth didn't ask why. She just turned to a new page in her notebook and wrote, patient requested attorney consult, patient initiated, to address medical and financial decision-making authority, October 10, 2022, 9:03 p.m. That was the first boundary. The first line Marion drew, not with her voice, but with paper. And paper, she knew, could hold more weight than any argument. The next morning, Daniel arrived at 9:15. He saw the mail sleeve still sitting on the tray table. He picked it up, glanced at the documents inside, and said, Oh, I meant to give these to you earlier. Just trying to stay organized. Marion looked at him. I didn't ask you to sort my mail. I know. I thought it would help. It didn't. Daniel set the sleeve down. His expression shifted, something between confusion and defensiveness. Mom, I'm just trying to be helpful. You've been sick. There's a lot to manage. I'll manage it, Marion said. Daniel stood there for a moment, then nodded. Okay. If that's what you want. He left 10 minutes later. Ruth made another note. Patient declined son's unsolicited assistance with personal mail. Set boundary verbally. Son appeared uncomfortable but compliant. October 11th, 9:27 a.m. By the second week of November, Marion had settled into the rhythm of the step-down unit. Morning vitals at 6 a.m., temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen saturation. Breakfast tray at 7:30, oatmeal, orange juice, weak coffee. Physician rounds at 11, Dr. Halvorsen with her tablet, asking questions, listening to lungs, updating the care plan. Lunch at noon. Physical therapy at 2 p.m., walking the hallway with a therapist named Marcus, a young man with a gentle manner and infinite patience. Dinner at 5. Evening vitals at 8. Lights dimmed at 9. Ruth came every afternoon and stayed until 10 p.m. She brought books Marian didn't read, crossword puzzles they worked on together, and her green ink notebook, which grew thicker with entries. Kendra texted more frequently now, thinking of you, praying for you, love you mom. The messages felt different, warmer, more present. Daniel's visits followed a pattern. He arrived at 9 in the morning, just after Dr. Halvorsen rounded. He spoke to the charge nurse first, asking about overnight vitals, lab results, and discharge timelines. Then he came into the room, kissed his mother on the forehead, and said, "How are we doing?" "We," as if her body were a shared project. He brought smoothies in clear plastic cups, strawberry banana, mixed berry, green with spinach and apple. He brought magazines, Reader's Digest, AARP the magazine, Better Homes and Gardens. He brought a small folder with printed articles about pneumonia recovery, pulmonary rehabilitation, and home oxygen safety. He also brought, on November 2nd, a revised version of the Medical Power of Attorney. This time, it was only 4 pages instead of 12. The language was simpler. Sticky flags marked 3 sections: agent designation, treatment preferences, signature, and witness. "Simplified it," Daniel said, setting it on the tray. "You can sign after lunch." Ruth was there, as always. She sat in the recliner with her green notebook open, writing times, recording names. She didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. She just documented. And every time Daniel suggested signing, she wrote, "MPOA presented and signed, no notary present, no witnesses confirmed, patient deferred decision." On November 4th, Dr. Halvorsen conducted a formal capacity assessment. She stood at the foot of the bed with her tablet and asked a series of questions designed to evaluate cognitive clarity and decision-making ability. "Can you tell me today's date?" November 4th, 2022. "Where are you?" "St. Luke's Medical Center, Des Moines, Iowa." "Do you understand why you're here?" "I have pneumonia. It got worse. I'm recovering." "Do you understand the treatments we're providing?" "Yes. Antibiotics, oxygen, breathing treatments." "If we needed to make a decision about your care, about increasing support or stopping support, do you feel capable of making that decision?" "Yes." Dr. Halvorsen nodded, typed into her tablet, and looked at Marian directly. "You're doing well. Your oxygen requirement is decreasing. If this continues, we'll talk about discharge in 3 to 5 days." She tapped the screen once more and added, "I'm documenting in your chart that you're decisional. That means you have the capacity to make your own medical decisions. That's important." Marian understood what that meant. It meant she could make her own choices. It meant no one else could override her unless she explicitly gave them that authority. It meant that if someone tried to claim she wasn't capable of deciding, the medical record would provide evidence to the contrary. After Dr. Halvorsen left, Daniel turned to his mother and said, "See? You're getting better. Let's get the paperwork done so we don't have to think about it anymore." Marian looked at him. "I'll read it later." "Mom, it's 4 pages. You can read it in 5 minutes. Later," she repeated. Daniel stood there for a moment, the folder in his hand, and then set it on the chair. "Okay, later," but the way he said it wasn't patient. It was strategic, as if he were waiting for a better opening. That night, Ruth stayed late. She sat in the recliner with her notebook, cross-referencing medication times against the timestamps on the 4-pump. At one point, she looked up and said, "He's asking the nurses about you before he asks you." Marian nodded. "I noticed. And he's not including Kendra anymore." That was true. Daniel used to send group texts to both Kendra and Ruth with updates on Marian's condition. But in the past week, the texts had stopped. Ruth only knew what was happening because she was physically present. Kendra only knew because Ruth called her every evening. Ruth set her notebook down. "He's isolating the decision-making." "I know," Marian said. "We need to fix that." "I know," Marian said again. The next morning, November 5th, Marian woke at 5:30 a.m., and the room was still dark except for the faint glow of the monitors and the light from the hallway filtering through the partially closed door. She lay still, listening to the hum of the oxygen concentrator, The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, the distant sound of a meal cart rolling down the corridor. She thought about Daniel, her son, the boy who had once brought her dandelions from the backyard, who had helped her bake cookies for school fundraisers, who had sat beside her at Gerald's funeral and held her hand through the entire service without saying a word. That boy was somewhere inside the man who stood at the foot of her bed with folders and timelines. But right now, she couldn't see him. Right now, she saw someone who had searched inheritance before death on a tablet. Someone who had circled a funeral home's payment plan before she was even out of the ICU. Someone who wanted to be the point person without asking if that was what she wanted. She thought about the way he'd said, "You'll want the DNR, right?" As if her preferences were obvious. As if her life were a task to be managed efficiently. And she thought about the night nurse's quiet comment, "2 witnesses. Ethics consult if there's disagreement." She thought about those words until the 6 a.m. vitals check, and then she asked the nurse, a different woman this time, older, with gray hair and a name tag that read Patricia, RN, a direct question. If someone wanted to withdraw life support, how does that work here? Patricia paused, her fingers still on Marian's wrist, counting pulse. "Are you thinking about that for yourself?" "No. Just wondering." Patricia finished counting, made a note on a small clipboard, and then sat on the edge of the bed. Hospital policy requires documented consent from the patient, or from a legal healthcare agent if the patient can't consent. If there's any disagreement among family members, or if there's concern about whether the agent is acting in the patient's best interest, an ethics consult is required before any withdrawal proceeds. And the 2-witness thing? Patricia nodded. For certain decisions, especially withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment when the patient is decisional, we require 2 clinical witnesses to confirm that the patient's consent is informed and voluntary. It's a safeguard. Is that written somewhere? Yes. Hospital Policy Manual. You can request a copy from the patient advocate. Can you page them? Patricia stood. I'll send a message now. 20 minutes later, a woman knocked on the door. Her name was Elena Morse, and she was 53 years old, with dark hair pulled into a low bun and a warm smile that felt practiced, but not false. She worked for the hospital's palliative care and ethics team, and she made rounds on patients who had been admitted for more than a week and had complex family dynamics or unclear goals of care. She sat in the chair across from the bed and said, "I wanted to check in. See how you're feeling. See if there's anything you need." Marian said, "I'm all right." Elena nodded. "Good. That's good." She folded her hands in her lap. "Nurse Patricia mentioned you had a question about hospital policy regarding end-of-life decisions." "I did. Can you tell me what prompted the question?" Marian considered how much to share. Then she said, "My son is trying to help. But I want to make sure my voice is the one that matters." Elena's expression softened. "That's exactly right. Your voice is the one that matters. And we have systems in place to make sure it's heard." She pulled a small tablet from her bag and opened a document. "Let me walk you through the policy." She explained, if a patient was decisional, meaning they had the mental capacity to understand and make choices, their consent was required for any major medical decision, including withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment. That consent had to be documented in the medical record. In cases where family members disagreed with the patient's decision, or where there was concern about undue influence, the hospital's ethics committee could be consulted. If a patient was not decisional, due to unconsciousness, severe illness, or cognitive impairment, then a designated healthcare agent could make decisions on their behalf. But if multiple family members claimed decision-making authority, or if there was disagreement about what the patient would have wanted, an ethics review was mandatory. "And the 2-witness requirement?" Marian asked. "That applies when a decisional patient consents to withdrawal," Elena said. "We require 2 clinicians, nurses, physicians, or other licensed staff to witness and document that the patient understands the decision, is making it voluntarily, and has been informed of the consequences. It's an added layer of protection. Can I get a copy of that policy?" Elena smiled. "Of course. I'll bring it this afternoon." She returned at 2 p.m. with a manila folder. Inside was a printed copy of St. Luke's Medical Center Policy No. 47-12, End-of-Life Decision-Making and Withdrawal of Life-Sustaining Treatment. It was 3 pages long, single-spaced, with sections highlighted in yellow by Elena. The relevant passage read, "In cases where withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment is requested, the attending physician must document the patient's wishes or the legal representative's authority. If the patient is decisional, their consent must be witnessed by 2 clinical staff members who will attest that the patient understands the nature of the decision, the alternatives available, and the probable outcomes. If the patient is not decisional and there is disagreement among family members or concern about the representative's authority or intent, an ethics consult must be initiated before any withdrawal proceeds. In cases of suspected coercion, undue influence, or conflict of interest, the hospital reserves the right to seek court intervention." Marian read it twice. Ruth read it once, then placed a sticky note on the paragraph about 2 witnesses. She wrote in the margin, "Policy confirmed 2-witness requirement for patient consent to withdrawal, ethics consult mandatory if disagreement among family, November 5, 2022. Elena stood. "If you need anything else, if you want to talk more, if you want to set up a medical power of attorney with legal services, if you want an ethics consult for any reason, you can page me through the nurse's station." "I'd like to set up the power of attorney," Marian said. "I'll connect you with our legal services liaison. They can arrange bedside notarization." "Thank you." After Elena left, Ruth turned to Marian. "We're going to fix this." Marian nodded. She wasn't afraid. She was just tired of pretending she didn't know what was happening. That night, Ruth pulled a document from her bag. It was a draft medical power of attorney, prepared by a family lawyer Ruth had contacted 2 days earlier. The lawyer's name was Richard Goss, and he was 63 years old, semi-retired, and specialized in estate planning for individuals with modest assets who wanted clarity more than complexity. Ruth had worked with him years ago when her own mother's estate went through probate, and she trusted him to be direct and thorough. The document Ruth showed Marian was different from the one Daniel had been pushing. It named 2 co-agents, Ruth Abbott and Kendra Holt. If they disagreed on a medical decision, the document required an automatic ethics consultation before any action could be taken. The document also separated medical decision-making from financial decision-making, specifying that financial power of attorney would be handled through a different instrument. Ruth set the draft on the tray. "Bedside notarization. 2 witnesses. We can do it as soon as the lawyer and notary are available." Marian looked at the document. It was 4 pages, printed on cream-colored paper, with clear section headings and language she could understand. It didn't erase Daniel. It just ensured he wouldn't act alone. "Yes," she said. Ruth made a note. MPOA revision drafted, co-agents Ruth Abbott and Kendra Holt, automatic ethics consult if disagreement, medical and financial powers separated, notary and legal services to be scheduled, patient-approved plan. November 5, 2022, 9:34 p.m. The next morning, November 6, Daniel came in at 8:45. He saw the manila folder from Elena sitting on the tray table. He picked it up, opened it, and saw the hospital policy document inside. "What's this?" he asked. "Hospital policy," Marian said. "About medical decisions." Daniel skimmed the first page. His expression changed, something between surprise and discomfort. "Why are you reading this?" "Because I want to know my rights." He set the folder down. "Mom, you don't need to worry about this stuff. You're getting better. I want to know anyway." Daniel looked at Ruth, who was sitting in the recliner with her notebook. "Did you give this to her?" "The hospital gave it to her," Ruth said calmly. "She requested it." Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't argue. He just stood there, processing. Then he said, "I'm trying to help. I'm trying to make sure everything's taken care of." "I know," Marian said. "But I'm the one who needs to decide what taken care of means." Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. He nodded once, picked up his folder, and left without saying goodbye. Ruth made a note. Patient asserted decision-making authority. Son, visibly frustrated, left without resolution, November 6, 8:58 a.m. That afternoon, the legal services liaison visited. Her name was Monica, and she was in her 30s, with short blonde hair and a brisk, professional manner. She carried a leather portfolio and explained that she could facilitate the preparation and execution of a medical power of attorney at bedside, including notarization and witness signatures. "Do you know who you want to designate?" Monica asked. "Two people," Marion said. "My sister, Ruth Abbott, and my daughter-in-law, Kendra Holt. They'll act together. If they disagree, we'll get an ethics consult." Monica made notes. "That's a co-agent structure with a dispute resolution mechanism. Smart. I'll draft it today and bring it back tomorrow for signature." "Thank you." Monica left. Ruth made a note. Legal services consult completed, co-agent MPOA to be drafted, execution scheduled November 6, 2:47 p.m. That evening, Kendra texted Marion directly. "I heard you're making some changes. I'm honored. I'll do right by you. I promise." Marion replied, "I know you will. Thank you for caring." The next day, November 7th, Monica returned with the completed document. It was printed on legal-sized paper, professionally formatted, with tabs marking the signature sections. Ruth and Kendra were listed as co-agents. The document included a clause requiring consensus on major decisions, and if consensus could not be reached, an ethics consultation would be automatically triggered before any action could proceed. Marion read every word. Ruth read it twice. Then Marion signed. Ruth signed as co-agent, and Kendra, who had driven over from Mercy Medical Center on her lunch break, signed as co-agent. Two nurses, Patricia and Ashley, served as witnesses. They watched Marion sign, confirmed her identity, and signed the witness lines. The notary was a woman in her early 40s who wore a gray blazer and carried a small leather bag with embossed gold initials. She sat up at the rolling tray table, arranged her stamps in a neat row, and asked Marion to state her full name and confirm she was signing of her own free will. Marion Louise Holt. "Yes, I'm signing voluntarily." The notary stamped each signature page, dated them November 7th, 2022, and handed the completed document to Monica, who scanned it into the hospital's electronic medical record system. "This is now part of your official chart," Monica said. "Anyone accessing your records will see that you have a medical power of attorney on file, and they'll see who your designated agents are." Ruth placed the original in a clear protective sleeve and made a note. MPOA executed, co-agents Ruth Abbott and Kendra Holt confirmed, two witnesses present. Notary certification completed, uploaded to medical record, November 7th, 11:43 a.m. That afternoon, a small icon appeared next to Marion's name in the hospital's patient portal. "Advanced directives on file, co-agents confirmed." Daniel did not visit that day. By the second week of November, the hospital had become a world unto itself. Marion knew the rhythm of the place, the clatter of meal carts at 7:30 a.m., noon, and 5 p.m., the soft chime of the elevator arriving on the 4th floor, the muffled conversations at the nurse's station. The way the light changed in her window as the day progressed, from pale morning gray to the warmer amber of late afternoon. She also knew the people. Patricia, the older RN with gray hair, worked the day shift Monday through Friday. Ashley, the younger nurse with the southern accent, worked nights Tuesday through Saturday. Marcus, the physical therapist, came every afternoon at 2 p.m. to walk her down the hallway, encouraging her with quiet phrases. "Good pace, breathe steady, you're getting stronger." Dr. Halvorsen rounded every morning at 11, always punctual, always thorough. She would review the overnight notes, listen to Marion's lungs with her stethoscope, ask about breathing, pain, and appetite, and then update the care plan. On November 9th, she said, "Your oxygen is down to 1 liter. If you can maintain saturation above 92% for 24 hours, we'll discontinue it." "And then?" Marion asked. "Then we talk about discharge. Home health for a week or 2. Follow up with pulmonology in 4 weeks. You'll recover fully, but it'll take time." Marion nodded. She wanted to go home. But she also knew that going home meant returning to a life where she would be alone again, where Daniel would resume his Sunday phone calls, where the folder with the beneficiary forms and the funeral pamphlet would still exist, somewhere in his office. Ruth came every day. She brought tea in a thermos, crossword puzzles, and her green notebook, which now contained 23 pages of entries. She also brought news. She'd spoken to Richard Goss, the estate planning attorney, about creating a trust to hold Marion's assets. The trust would have an independent trustee, a spendthrift clause, and specific instructions about distributions. It would also include a small scholarship fund in Gerald's name. Why trust? Marion asked. Because it removes control from any one person, Ruth said. If your assets are in a trust, Daniel can't access them without the trustee's approval. And if something happens to you, the distributions happen according to your instructions, not someone else's timeline. Marion considered this. How long does it take to set up? About 10 days. Richard will draft the documents. You'll sign them here with a notary. We'll file them with the county recorder. Do it, Marion said. Ruth made a note. Trust planning initiated, independent trustee model, spendthrift clause, scholarship fund in Gerald's name, attorney to draft documents, November 9, 2022. That same afternoon, a different kind of visitor arrived. Her name was Dr. Leah Patel, and she was a palliative care fellow in her early 30s, tall, soft-spoken, with the kind of careful diction that comes from years of delivering difficult news. She wore a white coat over a blue dress, and she carried a tablet. She sat in the chair beside the bed and said, "I wanted to talk with you about your goals of care." Marion had been expecting this. Palliative care consultations were standard for patients who had been hospitalized for more than a week with serious illness. The goal wasn't to push for end-of-life decisions, it was to clarify what the patient wanted. "What do you want me to know about what matters to you?" Dr. Patel asked. Marion thought for a moment. Then she said, "I want aggressive treatment when it's medically indicated. I don't want withdrawal unless I say so. If I can't say so, I want my co-agents, Ruth and Kendra, to have time to talk, to consult with doctors, to make a decision based on what I would want, not what's easiest." Dr. Patel typed as Marion spoke. "And what would you want if treatment wasn't working?" "I want time-limited trials. Try something. Reevaluate. If it's not helping, we talk again. But I don't want anyone making a decision to stop based on fear or speed or convenience." Dr. Patel nodded. "That's very clear. I'm going to document this in your chart. I'll write that you prefer aggressive, goal-directed treatment, that you distinguish between comfort care and withdrawal, that you want time-limited trials with reevaluation, and that any decision to withdraw life-sustaining treatment should be made collaboratively with your co-agents and should involve an ethics consult if there's disagreement." "Write it exactly like that," Marion said. Dr. Patel read the summary back to her, word for word. "Is that accurate?" "Yes." "I'm noting this in your chart now," Dr. Patel said, typing. "It's part of your permanent record. If anyone has questions about your preferences, this is what we'll reference." Marion felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief, not yet, but confirmation. The words she'd chosen were now part of the infrastructure. They were on file. They had weight. If Daniel tried to push for withdrawal, if he tried to claim she would want no suffering or no heroics, the medical record would say otherwise. After Dr. Patel left, Ruth made another entry. Palliative care consult completed, goals of care documented, patient prefers aggressive treatment when indicated, distinguishes comfort from withdrawal. Wants time-limited trials with reevaluation. Any withdrawal requires collaborative decision with co-agents and ethics review. November 9th, 3:22 p.m. That night, Kendra came to visit. She arrived at 7:30 p.m. Between her shifts, she'd worked the previous night and would work again tonight, but she had a 6-hour break. She brought a small casserole dish wrapped in foil, baked ziti with mozzarella and ricotta. "For when you get home," she said, setting it on the rolling table. "You can freeze it." Marion smiled. "Thank you." They talked for a while, about nothing important, just small things. The weather, Kendra's work, a new coffee shop that had opened near Kendra and Daniel's house. But then Kendra's expression shifted. She leaned forward slightly and said, "I need to tell you something." Marian waited. Daniel doesn't know I'm here right now, Kendra said. He thinks I'm sleeping before my shift. But I wanted to see you. And I wanted to say, I'm worried about him. Why? He's not sleeping. He's on his laptop late at night, looking at things, making lists. He's stressed about work, about money, about the future. And I think he's convinced himself that being in control of your care is the same as helping you, she paused. But control isn't the same as care. Marian nodded. I know. I told him we need to slow down. That we need to listen to you. He didn't respond well. What did he say? He said I didn't understand how serious it was. That if something happened, we'd need to act quickly. That it was better to have everything in place, Kendra's voice wavered slightly. But you're getting better. And even if you weren't, rushing isn't the answer. Marian reached out and took Kendra's hand. Thank you. For what? For seeing it. For saying something. Kendra squeezed her hand. You're his mother. But you're also a person. And you get to decide. After Kendra left, Ruth returned to the room. She'd stepped out to get coffee from the cafeteria. She saw the casserole, saw Marian's expression, and said, Kendra was here. She was. Good. Ruth opened her notebook and made a brief entry. Daughter-in-law visited, expressed concern about son's stress and need for control, affirmed patient's autonomy, supportive, November 9th, 8:14 p.m. The next day, November 10th, Marian woke early. The room was dim, the sun not yet up. She lay still, listening to the sounds of the hospital waking, carts rolling, distant voices, the hiss of automatic doors opening and closing. She thought about the clear sleeve labeled urgent, the beneficiary forms, the funeral pamphlet, the search history. She thought about the way Daniel had said, you'll want the DNR, right? As if her death were something to be organized, scheduled, expedited. She thought about the trust Ruth was arranging, the co-agents, the ethics consult trigger, the two-witness requirement. She thought about all the small, careful steps she and Ruth had taken to build a structure, a set of rails that would guide decisions if she couldn't make them herself. And she realized this wasn't just about protecting herself. It was about protecting Daniel, too. Because if she didn't set these boundaries now, if she didn't create these safeguards, Daniel would make decisions he'd regret later. He'd live with the weight of them. And she didn't want that for him. Later that morning, Patricia came in for vitals. As she wrapped the blood pressure cuff around Marian's arm, she said, You seem lighter today. Lighter? Less worried. Marian thought about it. Maybe I am. Good, Patricia said. She finished the check, wrote the numbers on her clipboard, and paused at the door. You know, I've been a nurse for 32 years. And the patients who do best are the ones who know what they want and say it out loud. You're doing that. Keep doing it. Marian nodded. I will. After Patricia left, Marian asked Ruth to bring her purse again. Ruth did. This time, Marian pulled out her wallet, found a small card tucked behind her driver's license, and handed it to Ruth. It was the business card for Richard Goss, the estate planning attorney. Ruth had given it to her days ago, but Marian had kept it, unsure whether she'd need it. Call him, Marian said. Let's set up a phone consultation. I want to talk through the trust, the power of attorney separation, all of it. Ruth smiled. I'll call him now. She stepped into the hallway and returned 15 minutes later. He's available tomorrow at 10 a.m. phone call. I'll put him on speaker. Good, Marian said. The next morning, November 11th, Richard Goss called at 10 a.m. sharp. Ruth placed her phone on the tray table and activated the speaker. Richard's voice was warm, slightly gravelly, the voice of someone who had spent decades in courtrooms and conference rooms. Marian, good to hear from you. Ruth tells me you're recovering well. I am. Thank you. She also tells me you want to structure your assets in a way that protects your autonomy and reduces conflict. Is that right? Yes. Good. Let's talk about what that looks like. For the next 30 minutes, Richard walked Marian through the options. A revocable trust would hold her house, her savings, and her life insurance. She would be the primary beneficiary during her lifetime, but after her death, the assets would be distributed according to her instructions. An independent trustee, someone outside the family, a professional fiduciary, would manage the distributions and ensure they followed her wishes. The trust would include a spendthrift clause, which meant no beneficiary could demand immediate access to the funds. Distributions would happen on a schedule, a percentage to Daniel, a percentage to a scholarship fund in Gerald's name, a percentage to a local charity. Richard also recommended separating the financial power of attorney from the medical one. You've already designated Ruth and Kendra for medical decisions. For financial decisions, I'd recommend either appointing the same trustee who manages the trust or naming a separate agent, someone you trust who isn't emotionally involved. The trustee, Marian said. Keep it simple. Smart. I'll draft everything and send it to Ruth by Monday. You'll need to sign in front of a notary, and we'll file the trust and deed with the county recorder. How long until it's official? Once you sign and we file, it's effective immediately. The house deed will transfer to the trust upon your death, and the beneficiary designations will update automatically. Thank you, Marian said. After the call ended, Ruth made a detailed entry. Attorney consult completed revocable trust to be drafted, independent trustee for financial decisions, spendthrift clause included, scholarship fund in Gerald's name, house deed to transfer to trust, life insurance beneficiaries to be updated, medical and financial powers separated, documents to be delivered November 14th to November 11th, 10:31 a.m. That afternoon, Daniel arrived. He didn't bring a folder this time. He brought a newspaper and a cup of coffee from Starbucks. He sat in the chair and said, "How are you feeling?" "Better," Marian said. "Good. Dr. Halvorsen says you might be discharged early next week." "Maybe." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Daniel said, "I heard you set up a medical power of attorney. With Ruth and Kendra." "I did. Why didn't you ask me to be part of it?" Marian looked at him. "Because I needed balance. And I needed people who would take their time." Daniel's expression tightened. "You think I wouldn't? I think you want to help. But I think you want to fix things fast. And some things can't be fixed fast." Daniel didn't respond right away. He looked down at his coffee cup, turning it slowly in his hands. Finally, he said, "I'm scared, Mom. I don't want to lose you." "I know," Marian said softly. "But being scared doesn't mean you get to control everything." He looked up. "I'm not trying to control you." "Then what were the beneficiary forms for? The funeral pamphlet? The search about withdrawing life support?" Daniel's face went pale. "You know about that?" "I know." He set the coffee cup down. I wasn't planning anything. I was just trying to be prepared. In case. In case of what? In case you got worse. In case you couldn't decide. I didn't want to be caught off guard." Marian's voice was calm but firm. "Being prepared is different from making plans without me." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You're right. I'm sorry." It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't a confession. But it was acknowledgement. And for now, that was enough. He stayed for another 20 minutes, talking about nothing important, and then left. Ruth, who had been sitting in the recliner pretending to read a magazine, made a note. Son acknowledged overreach, partial apology given, patient maintained boundary, November 11th, 3:47 p.m. That evening, Marian asked Ruth to help her write something. Ruth pulled out a legal pad and a pen. "What do you want to say?" Ruth asked. "I want to leave a note. For Daniel, for you, for Kendra. Something they'll see if anything happens to me." "What should it say?" Marian thought for a moment. Then she dictated. "If something happens, I want time and clarity. No rush. Talk to each other. Eat something. Rest. Then decide. I trust you. But take your time." Ruth wrote it down, then read it back. "That's good." Marian nodded. "When the trust documents come, tape that inside the front cover." "I will," Ruth said. And with that, another rail was set. November 14th arrived cold and overcast. Marian woke to the sound of rain against the window, a steady patter that reminded her of mornings in the house she shared with Gerald, when they would sit at the kitchen table with coffee and watch the weather move through. The oxygen had been discontinued 2 days earlier. Her saturation held steady at 96% on room air. Her appetite had returned. She'd finished her breakfast tray that morning, even the oatmeal, which she usually left untouched. Dr. Halvorsen had mentioned discharge again, probably Wednesday or Thursday. We'll arrange home health, oxygen equipment just in case, and follow-up appointments. But today wasn't about discharge. Today was about signing documents. Richard Goss arrived at 10 a.m. He was a man in his early 60s, with a full head of white hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a suit that looked like it had been tailored in 1985 and maintained impeccably ever since. He carried a leather briefcase, which he set on the rolling table beside Marian's bed. "Good morning," he said. "You're looking well." "Thank you," Marian said. He opened the briefcase and pulled out a blue folder, thick with documents. "I've prepared everything we discussed. Let's go through it piece by piece." For the next 40 minutes, Richard walked Marian through each document. First, the revocable trust agreement. Marian would be the grantor and the primary beneficiary during her lifetime. Upon her death, the trust would distribute assets according to a detailed schedule. 60% of liquid assets would fund a scholarship in Gerald's name, administered by the local community college. 25% would go to the literacy program where Marian had volunteered. 15% would go to Daniel, distributed over 3 years in equal installments. The house would remain in the trust and could not be sold without the co-trustees' approval. The trustee would be a professional fiduciary named Thomas Brennan, a man in his 50s who had managed estate trusts for 20 years and had no personal connection to the family. Second, the durable financial power of attorney. This was separate from the medical power of attorney. It designated Thomas Brennan as the sole agent for financial decisions if Marian became incapacitated. This meant Daniel would have no access to her accounts, her house, or her assets without the trustees' approval. Third, the deed transfer on death. The house deed would remain in Marian's name during her lifetime, but upon her death, it would automatically transfer to the trust. This avoided probate and ensured the house couldn't be sold or mortgaged without following the trust's instructions. Fourth, updated beneficiary designations for her life insurance policy and retirement accounts. All beneficiaries were changed to the trust, not to individuals. "Once you sign these," Richard said, "everything is in place. Your medical decisions are controlled by Ruth and Kendra. Your financial decisions are controlled by the trustee. Your assets are protected. And if Daniel or anyone else tries to circumvent this structure, they'll face significant legal obstacles." Marian read every word. Ruth read every word. Then Marian signed. Ruth signed as a witness. Kendra, who had arrived during the consultation, signed as a co-trustee for the medical power of attorney and as a witness for the financial documents. The notary, the same woman in the gray blazer who had notarized the medical power of attorney, returned. She watched Marian sign each document, confirmed her identity, and applied her official stamp and signature to every page. By 11:30 a.m., it was done. Richard placed copies of everything into a second blue folder, which he handed to Ruth. "These are yours. The originals will be filed with the county recorder's office today. The trust will be effective immediately. The deed transfer will be recorded by the end of business tomorrow." "Thank you," Marian said. Richard stood, packed his briefcase, and shook Marian's hand. "You've done something most people don't do. You've protected your voice. Even if you can't speak someday, these documents will speak for you." After he left, Ruth opened the blue folder and looked at the stack of papers inside. Each one was tabbed, labeled, and organized. She turned to the first page of the trust document and, using clear tape, affixed the handwritten note Marian had dictated days earlier. "If something happens, I want time and clarity. No rush. Talk to each other. Eat something. Rest. Then decide. I trust you. But take your time." Ruth closed the folder and set it on the windowsill beside the spider plant, which had grown 3 new shoots. That afternoon, Dr. Patel returned. She had printed a summary of Marian's goals of care and brought it in a clear plastic sleeve. She handed it to Marian and said, "This is now part of your permanent medical record. I wanted you to have a copy for yourself." The summary read, "Patient is decisional and able to participate in care decisions. Patients prefer aggressive, goal-directed treatment when medically indicated. Patients distinguish comfort-focused care from withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment. Patient requests time-limited trials of any intervention, with re-evaluation and collaborative decision-making involving her designated co-agents, Ruth Abbott and Kendra Holt. The patient does not consent to withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment without her explicit approval. If a patient is unable to provide consent, co-agents must reach consensus. If unable to reach consensus, an ethics consult is required before any withdrawal proceeds. Two-witness documentation is required for any withdrawal consent provided by the patient. Marian read it and felt, for the first time in weeks, a deep sense of relief. It was all there. Her voice, her preferences, her boundaries. Documented. Filed. Irrevocable. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome," Dr. Patel replied. "You've done the work. Now it's our job to honor it." After she left, Ruth made a final entry for the day. Trust executed, financial POA executed, deed transfer initiated, beneficiaries updated, goals of care summary provided to patient, all documents filed and uploaded. Patient expressed relief, November 14th, 11:54 a.m. That evening, Daniel did not visit. But Kendra sent a text. "Everything is in place. You're safe. Rest now." Marian replied, "Thank you. For everything." She set her phone on the tray table and looked out the window. The rain had stopped. The sky was clearing. The parking lot below glowed under the streetlights, wet pavement reflecting orange and white. She thought about the blue folder, the trust, the co-agents, the two-witness rule, the ethics consult trigger. She thought about the rails she and Ruth had built, rails that would guide any future decision, rails that couldn't be moved or bypassed without significant effort and oversight. And she thought about Daniel, who had wanted to be the point person, who had searched withdrawing life support in the middle of the night, who had organized her mail and flagged beneficiary forms before she even knew he was doing it. He wasn't a bad person. He was a scared person. And scared people make bad decisions when they're given too much control and too little accountability. So she'd taken control back. Not with shouting. Not with accusations. But with paperwork. With policy. With witnesses. She closed her eyes and listened to the sound of the hospital at night, the hum of the ventilation system, the distant beep of monitors, the quiet footsteps of nurses making rounds. For the first time in weeks, she slept deeply. By November 20th, Marian had been discharged. She'd left St. Luke's on November 17th, a Thursday, with a folder full of discharge instructions, prescriptions for an inhaler and an antibiotic, and a home health schedule. Visits from a nurse on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for 2 weeks. Ruth had driven her home. The house was exactly as she'd left it a month earlier, except cleaner. Ruth and Kendra had come by while Marian was in the hospital and scrubbed every surface, vacuumed every rug, washed every dish. The refrigerator was stocked. The bed was made. The heat was on. Marian walked through the room slowly, touching familiar objects. The kitchen table where she and Gerald used to eat breakfast, the recliner where she read library books, the shelf where her 3-ring binders of tax returns and medical records sat in labeled rows. Home. She sat in the recliner and cried, not from sadness, but from relief. Ruth sat on the couch and waited. When Marian stopped crying, Ruth said, "You're safe now." "I know," Marian said. That was Sunday. By Monday, Marian had fallen into a new routine. She woke at 6:30, made tea, sat at the kitchen table with the blue folder open in front of her. She didn't read the documents every day, just often enough to remember what was there. Daniel called on Tuesday. It was the first time they'd spoken since the trust was executed. His voice was careful, measured. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Stronger." "Good. I'm glad you're home." "Thank you." There was a pause. Then he said, "Can we talk? In person?" "When?" "This week. Whenever works for you." Marian thought about it. "Wednesday. 2 p.m. I'll be there." He hung up. Ruth, who had been sitting at the table with her notebook, looked at Marian. "Do you want me there?" "Yes." "And Kendra?" "And Elena?" "The social worker?" "Yes. I want this to be clear. I want witnesses. Ruth made a note. Patient requested family meeting with witnesses present. Social worker Elena Morse to be invited, co-agents to attend, November 22nd, 2022. That night, Ruth called Elena and explained the situation. Elena agreed to attend as a neutral facilitator. It's not unusual, she said. Sometimes families need structured conversations to make sure everyone's on the same page. I'm happy to help. On Wednesday, November 23rd, at 2 p.m., 6 people gathered in Marion's living room. Marion sat in the recliner, dressed in comfortable clothes, gray sweatpants, a soft blue sweater, slippers. Her breathing was steady. Her color was good. She looked like someone who had been sick and was now well. Ruth sat on the couch to Marion's left. Kendra sat on the couch to Marion's right. Elena Morse, the social worker from St. Luke's, sat in a wooden chair brought in from the dining room. She had a tablet on her lap and a calm, professional demeanor. Daniel sat across from Marion, in a chair he'd pulled in from the kitchen. He wore jeans and a sweater. He looked tired. The sixth person was Dr. Halvorsen, who had agreed to join by phone for the first 5 minutes to confirm, on the record, that Marion was decisional and capable of making her own decisions. Elena placed her phone on the coffee table and dialed Dr. Halvorsen's number. The call connected to the speaker. Dr. Halvorsen speaking. This is Elena Morse, social worker at St. Luke's. I'm here with Marion Holt and her family. We're having a care planning discussion, and Marion requested that you join briefly to confirm her decisional capacity. Of course. Marion, can you hear me? Yes, Marion said. Can you tell me today's date? November 23rd, 2022. Where are you? At home. In Des Moines. Do you understand why we're having this meeting? Yes. To make sure everyone understands my care plan and my wishes. Do you feel capable of making your own medical and financial decisions? Yes. Have you been coerced or pressured by anyone to make decisions you don't agree with? No. Dr. Halvorsen's voice was firm and clear. For the record, I am documenting that Marion Holt is decisional as of November 23rd, 2022, at 2 p.m. She has capacity to make her own decisions. This will be noted in her outpatient record. Thank you, Elena said. Dr. Halvorsen disconnected. Elena turned to the group. Let's start with what Marion wants to share. Marion looked at her son. She didn't speak quickly. She didn't raise her voice. She just stated facts. Daniel, I appreciate everything you've done. You visited me in the hospital. You tried to help. But I've made some changes. She paused, letting the words settle. Ruth and Kendra are my co-agents for medical decisions. They'll make choices together if I can't. If they disagree, an ethics consult will be triggered. My financial decisions are managed by a professional trustee. My house and my assets are in a trust. The trust includes a scholarship in your father's name and a donation to the literacy program. You'll receive a distribution, but it's structured over time. Daniel started to speak, but Marion continued. If I need life support, we'll use time-limited trials with reevaluation. No withdrawal without my consent. If I can't consent, Ruth and Kendra will decide together, and any withdrawal will require an ethics review and 2 witnesses. Daniel's jaw tightened. Mom, I was just trying to. I know, Marion said. But this is what's right. Elena slid a piece of paper across the coffee table. It was a receipt, printed on St. Luke's letterhead, confirming that advance directives had been filed, co-agents identified, and preferences documented. We're all aligned, Elena said. These decisions are on record. Daniel picked up the receipt, read it, and set it down. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. I'm not trying to hurt you. I know, Marion said. But you were trying to control me. And that's not the same as helping. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, okay. Kendra reached across the couch and touched his hand. We'll do this together, she said. Daniel looked at her, then at his mother. Okay, he said again. The meeting ended at 2:45 p.m. Ruth logged it. Family meeting conducted. Directives confirmed. Capacity documented by Dr. Halvorsen. Receipt issued. Patient set clear boundaries. Son accepted terms. November 23rd, 2:47 p.m. After Elena left, Daniel stayed. He sat in the kitchen with Marian and Ruth, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't try to fix anything. He just sat. Eventually, he said, "I'm sorry." "I know," Marian said. "I was scared. And I thought being in control would make it less scary." "It doesn't," Marian said. "I know that now." They sat in silence for a while. Then Daniel said, "Can I help with anything? Groceries? Errands?" "You can fix the curtain rod in the bathroom," Marian said. "It's coming loose." Daniel smiled, small but real. "I can do that." He spent the next hour fixing the curtain rod, replacing a battery in the smoke detector, and tightening the screws on a wobbly cabinet door. When he left, he hugged his mother longer than usual and said, "I'll call you this weekend." "Good," Marian said. After he was gone, Ruth closed her notebook. "We did it." "We did," Marian agreed. The trust documents had gone into effect the day they were filed. That same week, Marian received 3 confirmations in the mail. One from Protective Life Insurance Company, acknowledging the updated beneficiary designations. The letter stated, "Primary beneficiary is now the Marian L. Holt Revocable Trust. Contingent beneficiaries are as listed in the trust document." One from Green State Credit Union, confirming that the payable on death form had been voided and replaced with a trust directive. One from the county recorder's office, confirming that the deed to her house had been updated to reflect the trust structure. Ruth filed all 3 letters in the blue folder behind the relevant tabs. Thanksgiving arrived on a cold, clear Thursday. Marian spent the day at Ruth's house. Ruth had cooked a small turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a pumpkin pie from the grocery store bakery. The food was simple and good. Daniel came with Kendra. He brought a bottle of sparkling cider and a store-bought pecan pie. He helped set the table, carve the turkey, and asked his mother how she was feeling. "Better," Marian said. "Stronger every day." "Good," Daniel said. And he meant it. After dinner, while Ruth and Kendra cleared plates, Marian asked Daniel to help carry serving dishes to the kitchen. They stood at the sink, side by side, rinsing plates and stacking them in the drying rack. The water ran warm over their hands. Marian spoke first. "If you ever face a decision about me, you won't face it alone." Daniel set a plate down. He didn't look at her. He stood very still, his hands wet, the faucet running. Then he said, "Okay." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a promise. It was just an acknowledgement. And for now, that was enough. They finished the dishes in silence. When they returned to the living room, Ruth had made coffee. Kendra had sliced the pies. They ate slowly, talked about work and weather and nothing heavy, and left before dark. That night, Marian sat in her living room with the blue binder open on her lap. She turned to the inside cover and read the note she dictated weeks earlier. "If something happens, I want time and clarity. No rush. Talk to each other. Eat something. Rest. Then decide. I trust you. But take your time." She closed the binder and set it on the shelf next to the television, beside the photo album Ruth had given her and the framed picture of Gerald. The spider plant from the hospital, which Ruth had brought home and placed on the kitchen windowsill, had started to recover. A new shoot was curling toward the light. Marian watered it, checked the soil, and let it be. December arrived with snow and short days. Marian woke early each morning, 5:30, 6 at the latest, and followed a routine that felt both new and familiar. Inhaler at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. pulse oximeter check after each use. Slow walk around the block if the sidewalks were clear. Tea at the kitchen table, looking out at the backyard where a single oak tree stood bare against the gray sky. Ruth visited 3 times a week, always with tea, always with conversation that didn't require much from Marian. They talked about books, about neighbors, about the weather. They didn't talk about the hospital. They didn't talk about Daniel. Those things were settled. Kendra came on Sundays, always with food, lasagna, casserole, soup in a plastic container. She'd sit on the couch while Marian napped, reading a magazine or scrolling through her phone. When Marian woke, they'd talk about Kendra's work, about Daniel, about nothing. Daniel's visits changed. He no longer arrived with folders or forms or questions about logistics. He came on Wednesday evenings, usually around 6, and stayed for an hour. He brought groceries when she needed them. He fixed things: the squeaky door hinge, the loose handle on the bathroom cabinet, the flickering light in the hallway. One evening in mid-December, he replaced a battery in the kitchen clock. When he finished, he stood at the counter, looking around as if searching for the next task. Marian said, "You don't have to fix everything." He turned. "I know. Do you?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I was scared. You were really sick. And I thought if I could just manage it, keep everything in order, then it wouldn't feel so out of control." Marian nodded. "I understand. But I wasn't listening," he said. "I was just moving." "You were," Marian agreed. "But you're here now." He looked at her. "Yeah, I'm here." They didn't talk about the search history. They didn't talk about the forms or the pamphlet or the timeline he'd been racing toward. Those things had happened. They were real. But they were also in the past, documented and resolved. And now, what mattered was what came next. On December 9th, Marian had a follow-up appointment with the pulmonologist. Ruth drove her to the clinic. The physician, Dr. Nguyen, reviewed her chest X-ray and listened to her lungs with a stethoscope. "Clear," he said. "No residual infiltrates. Your oxygen levels are excellent. You've made a full recovery. When do I come back?" Marian asked. 6 months. Just to make sure everything stays stable. But I don't anticipate any problems." Ruth logged the results in her notebook. She'd brought it with her, even though she wasn't adding entries as frequently, and then closed it. "I think I'm done," she said on the drive home. "Done with what?" Marian asked. "The logging. The tracking. It's over. You're safe. The systems are in place. There's nothing left to document." Marian looked at her sister. "Thank you." "You're welcome." That evening, Ruth came inside and set the green notebook on Marian's kitchen table. "This is yours now," she said. "If you ever need it, it's here." Marian opened it. 3 notebooks. Actually, Ruth had filled one, started a second, and nearly finished a third. Dates, times, names, events. A complete record of 5 weeks in October and November. Proof, if it was ever needed, of what had happened and how it had been addressed. Marian closed the notebook and placed it in the blue folder, in the back, behind all the legal documents. On December 15th, Marian received a letter from the local community college. It was handwritten, signed by the Director of Financial Aid, and it thanked her for including them in her estate plans. The letter also mentioned that they'd established a scholarship fund in Gerald's name, the Gerald Holt Memorial Scholarship for Adult Learners, and that the first award would be given in the spring semester. The program will serve students returning to education after years in the workforce. "We're honored to carry Gerald's name forward in this way. Thank you for your generosity and your vision." Marian read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the blue folder, behind the tab labeled Charitable Allocations. That evening, she sat on the porch, bundled in a coat, a blanket across her lap, and watched the fireflies. No, wait. It was December. There were no fireflies. But there were stars, bright and cold in the clear winter sky, and she watched them instead. She thought about Gerald. About the way he used to sit on this same porch in the summer and watch the fireflies with a beer in hand, his feet propped on the railing. She missed him. But the missing wasn't sharp anymore. It was softer now, a quiet ache that came and went. The next day, December 16th, the mail brought another letter. This one was from her insurance agent, confirming the updated beneficiaries. The agent had called first, reading the names back to Marian over the phone to ensure accuracy. Then the written confirmation arrived. Primary beneficiary, Marian L. Holt Revocable Trust. Contingent beneficiaries as designated in the trust document. Effective November 14th, 2022. Marian filed it. By December 20th, everything was settled. The trust was active. The directives were filed. The beneficiaries were updated. The house deed had been transferred. The financial power of attorney was assigned to the trustee. The medical power of attorney was split between Ruth and Kendra. Marian's life had been restructured, not in a way that erased Daniel, but in a way that ensured he couldn't act alone, couldn't rush, couldn't make decisions driven by fear or urgency or the need to feel in control. And the result was peace. Daniel came by on December 21st, the winter solstice. He brought a small artificial Christmas tree in a box and asked if she wanted help setting it up. Yes, Marian said. They spent an hour putting the tree together, stringing lights, hanging a few simple ornaments. Daniel worked carefully, asking where she wanted things, adjusting branches until she was satisfied. When they finished, he plugged in the lights. The tree glowed softly in the corner of the living room. It looks good, Marian said. It does, Daniel agreed. He sat on the couch. Marian sat in the recliner. They drank tea and talked about Christmas plans Ruth was hosting again, just a small gathering, nothing elaborate. Before he left, Daniel said, "I'm glad you're okay, Mom." "I am," Marian said. "I really am." He hugged her at the door, and when he pulled back, his eyes were damp. He didn't say anything else. He just nodded and left. After he was gone, Marian stood in the living room, looking at the tree. The lights blinked slowly, casting soft shadows on the walls. She thought about the blue folder on the shelf. The trust. The directives. The logged entries in Ruth's notebook. The policy documents from the hospital. She thought about the rails she'd built, rails that would hold if she ever needed them again. And she thought about Daniel, who had wanted to be the point person, who had wanted to manage and control and fix. He was learning. Slowly. But he was learning. She turned off the lamp and went to bed. That night, she slept deeply, without interruption, and woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the window. Spring came slowly. March brought rain and mud. April brought green shoots and daffodils. By May, the oak tree in the backyard had filled in with new leaves, and the spider plant on the kitchen windowsill had grown so tall it needed a stake to hold it upright. Marian's days had a rhythm now. She woke early, made tea, worked in the small garden behind the house. She'd planted tomatoes, basil, zucchini, and lettuce. The work was simple and satisfying, digging in the soil, pulling weeds, watering in the early morning before the heat set in. Ruth still came by, but less frequently. Once a week now, sometimes less. They'd sit on the porch with iced tea and talk about nothing important. The green notebooks sat on Marian's shelf, untouched. Kendra visited every other Sunday. She and Daniel came together sometimes, but not always. When they came, they brought food and stayed for a few hours. The visits were easy, unhurried. Daniel's language had changed. He no longer said, "We should," or "You'll want to." Instead, he asked, "Would you like me to? Do you need help with? Can I?" It sounded small. It wasn't. On a Saturday in mid-May, Marian received a call from Thomas Brennan, the trustee. He was checking in, confirming that all the accounts were in order, that the trust was functioning as intended. "Everything looks good," he said. "The house is titled correctly. The beneficiaries are updated. The scholarship fund is active. First award was given last month. The charity received their acknowledgement letter. You've done excellent work here." "Thank you," Marian said. "Do you need anything from me?" "No. Just keep it steady." "I will." After the call, Marian sat at the kitchen table with the blue folder open in front of her. She turned to the note taped inside the front cover. "If something happens, I want time and clarity. No rush. Talk to each other. Eat something. Rest. Then decide. I trust you. But take your time." She read it, then closed the folder and returned it to the shelf. On a Sunday in late May, Daniel and Kendra came for lunch. Kendra had made a pasta salad. Daniel had brought bread from the bakery on 5th Street. They ate on the porch, the sun warm but not too hot, a light breeze moving through the trees. After lunch, Daniel said, "I've been thinking about Dad." Marian looked at him. "What about him?" "About how he always said, 'Take your time. Do it right.'" I didn't understand what he meant. I thought doing it right meant doing it fast. Being efficient. Getting things done. He paused. But that's not what he meant. He meant, take the time to think. To ask. To listen. Marian nodded. That's exactly what he meant. Daniel looked at her. "I'm trying to do that now." "I know," Marian said. "I see it. That evening, after they left, Marian stood at the kitchen sink and filled the kettle. The late afternoon light came through the window, catching the water and making it glow. She turned off the faucet and set the kettle on the stove. She didn't light the burner yet. She just stood there, watching the light shift, feeling her breath move in and out, steady and calm. There was no bitterness left. No anger. Just the quiet knowledge that she'd been heard, that her voice had weight, that the systems she'd built, paperwork and policy and witnessed signatures, had held. The house was hers. Not in the way ownership is written on a deed, but in the way presence is written into a life. By June, the follow-up appointment with the pulmonologist confirmed what Marian already knew: full recovery. Dr. Nguyen discharged her from care. "You're done," he said. "No more appointments unless something changes." Ruth logged it one last time, in a new notebook she'd started just for this. Final pulmonary follow-up, discharged from care, patient fully recovered, June 14, 2023. Then she closed the notebook and gave it to Marian. That's the end of the record. Marian took it, placed it in the blue folder, and set the folder back on the shelf. On a Sunday in late June, Daniel came by unannounced. He knocked twice, then let himself in when Marian called. "It's open." He stood in the doorway, looking around the kitchen. The counters were clean. The sink was empty. The plant on the windowsill stretched toward the light. The blue folder sat on the shelf, undisturbed. "You need anything?" he asked. "No," Marian said. "I'm all right." He nodded, but he didn't leave right away. He looked at the folder, then at his mother. "I see it every time I come over." "Good," Marian said. He almost smiled. "Yeah, I guess that's the point." They stood there for a moment, the silence not uncomfortable, just present. Then he said, "Call me if you change your mind." "I will," she answered. And she meant it. After he left, Marian stood at the sink and filled the kettle. The water glowed where the late afternoon sun hit it, a soft shimmer that made the ordinary look luminous. She turned off the faucet and set the kettle on the stove. She didn't light the burner yet. She just stood there, watching the light shift, feeling her breath move in and out, steady and calm. The blue folder sat on the shelf. The photo of Gerald smiling from the frame. The spider plant reached toward the window. And Marian stood in her kitchen, breathing steady, present, alive, and free. Outside, the world continued its slow turning. The oak tree swayed in the breeze. A car passed on the street. A neighbor called their dog. Inside, the kettle sat on the stove, the water catching the light, and Marian Holt, 59 years old, a widow, a mother, a sister, a woman who had been sick and was now well, stood at her sink and watched the shimmer. She didn't think about the hospital. She didn't think about the folder or the searches or the timeline Daniel had been racing toward. She just stood. Just breathed. Just lived. And that was enough. Every story here will stir your soul. Welcome to Spice and Sugar, your daily escape into real emotions, bold lives, and unforgettable lessons. Here, it's all about love, loss, laughter, and the quiet strength that carries us through. I share stories that make you feel, that remind you you're not alone, that every bitter moment can lead to something sweet. If you want to laugh, cry, and see life through stories that heal and inspire, subscribe and stay a while.